Welcome to the Rap Soul Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of music that moves our hearts and gets our feet tapping. This is the intersection of rap and soul music from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. We appreciate you for listening. Share this podcast with a friend or family member who loves music as much as you do. The podcast is hosted by 12 Kyle. Next up, the Rap Soul Podcast.
I learned when I was younger, you can't put your expectation of me on me. I'm me, you feel me? And you're not gonna ever make me feel bad for it. You're not gonna, make me react to how you reacting to me. I don't care, I'm me. We all are individuals. So for you to think my balance or my ratio, I'm to this or to that, and I ain't got enough of this and enough of that, that's all love. Just keep it to yourself, bro.
Welcome to another edition of the Rap Soul Podcast. I am your boy 12 Kyle. I want to thank you all for tuning in as you do each and every week. Again, this is the Rap Soul Podcast. This is the intersection where we have discussions about music and artists from the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s when it comes to rap, hip hop, soul, and R&B. Simply put, folks, this is the best music podcast that you have never heard. That is until right now. Shout out to those of you who are watching on YouTube as well as Spotify. All right, check this out. On this episode, I'm going to do something totally different than I've done in any of my previous episodes. On this episode, we're actually going to do a book review on a book that I've actually read twice, and it is now available on audiobook. The book is entitled The Marathon Don't Stop, The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle by Rob Kenner. Let me start by saying, first and foremost, rest in peace to the late, great Nipsey Hussle. As many of you know, or maybe you don't know, I'm a huge fan. He left us in 2019 way too soon, and we'll touch on his departure later in the episode. But at the time of this recording, by the time most of you hear this, we would have celebrated Nipsey Hussle's, what would have been his 41st birthday. And he was born August 15th, 1985 in Los Angeles. And ironically, I found out many years later that Nipsey Hussle not only was born August 15th, but same as my dad and same as one of my best friends, Jay Fresh, who actually lives in LA. Leos did not know it at all. Fun facts that you find out about people as you delve a little bit more into their life. But this book is a phenomenal read or listen. And I'm going to touch on why I think you should listen to it or read it. And more importantly, I got a lot from this book. My thing is when I'm listening or reading a book, I want to make sure that I get something from it that I did not know before. Now, of course, I know about Nipsey Hussle's music, but learning more about the man who became Nipsey Hussle, who he was before the record deal, who he became after his record deal, and everything in between was very, very fascinating to me. So I'll be honest, when I started reading and listening to, because I've read it and listened to it on audiobooks, The Marathon Don't Stop, The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle by Rob Kenner, it is something that I think you don't necessarily have to be a Nipsey Hussle fan to enjoy. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think I took a lot from it, and I'll touch on that throughout the podcast. But I want to start you off with a quote. When people think about Nipsey Hussle, they think about his music. Some think about Victory Lap. Some think about the Marathon clothing store, or others think about his tragic death in 2019. But Rob Kenner's book reminds us of Nipsey Hussle's greatest accomplishment. And that may have been for the vision that he had for his community. Close quote. I saw that quote and I thought that was very telling about this book. And it definitely, there's a definite correlation between what Nipsey's vision was and what happened and what continues to happen, not just in South Central LA, but around the world in the name of Nipsey Hussle. So let's get into it. Who is Rob Kenner? I'm sure many of you are probably asking. I had to ask the same thing myself because I wasn't familiar with Rob Kenner's work. Rob Kenner was the founding editor of Vibe magazine, and he developed a professional relationship with Nipsey early back in 2019 when the two met. Nipsey was then an up and coming rapper. He walked into the Vibe magazine office in New York City, and he was determined to get a feature on the in what they call the next section of the magazine. Rob Kenner was impressed by Nipsey's talent, his independence, his hustle, his unique business acumen. And over the next 10 years, the two developed a very good relationship, from his growth as a independent artist coming up to his Grammy nominated album Victory Lap. And so I think of all the people who could have written this book, I think Rob Kenner is probably first and foremost one of the most authentic people to write this book. This book does a great job of storytelling, very good at pacing as far as Nipsey's story. It's not rushed. You can tell that he did a lot of research, a lot of interviews. He interviewed everybody from, Nipsey's family members to, people that he knew in the business to everybody that was close and people who worked with him in the business acumen. He also gives a lot of historical context in this book, which I think is very key, because even something as simple as Nipsey's nickname, because his real name is Aramis Joseph Ashkadom, but he was labeled Nipsey Hussle by a childhood friend, which is a spinoff of the name Nipsey Russell, actor, comedian, activist back in the 60s and 70s. But yeah, and he also offers a unique balance between biography as far as telling Nipsey's story, as well as hip hop history. So it's a lot to unpack in the book, and the book taught me a lot, and I learned, a lot about Nipsey that I didn't know going in, which is my goal anytime I read a book. So let's get it started. I guess the first question that you would ask, well, who is Nipsey Hussle? Nipsey Hussle, as I mentioned, was born Aramis Joseph Ashkadom, August 15th, 1985. He grew up in the Crenshaw district of South Central Los Angeles. It was him, his mom, his mother's name is Angelique Smith, his little sister Samantha, and his big brother Samuel Ashkadom, better known as Black Sam. Shout out to Black Sam. Nipsey was someone who was a very intelligent young man, a very gifted student, and by all accounts was very much into rap music as a young person. In fact, his first love, as far as rappers were concerned, was the rap group Crisscross.
My first live show at Ladera Park, when I was like 6, we wore both overalls backwards and we was crisscross, me and my brother. You know what I'm saying? We performed Jump, you know what I'm saying? So probably since 1990, But then what's ironic, my first single as a rapper, was a sample from that Crisscross record, was Hustle in the House. You know what I mean? But as a performing artist, performing my own shit, I was probably 13. I did the Malcolm X Festival at Lamar Park. I performed one of my songs there. And then probably 06, 07, I started getting little bookings in LA.
He thought, even at an early age, that he would get a record deal as a rapper, as a kiddie rapper. And I thought that was very interesting, because kids normally don't think about being a rapper at that particular time, because you got to figure this is the mid 90s, around this time where he's kind of developing into who he's going to be. And as a young person, as a young kid, but he idolized Crisscross, and that's who he wanted to be. And he really thought that he was going to get a record deal as a rapper. But a couple of things happened to Nipsey early on in life. His mom and dad, I can't remember in the book, but I don't think his mom and dad ever married, but if they were married, they split early in his lifetime. He may have been 2 or 3, and he pretty much lived with his siblings, his mother and his grandmother. And then later on in his subsequent teenage years, he was back and forth between his mother's house and his grandmother's house. But one of the things that I found interesting and that I did not know was that Nipsey started writing raps very early. As early as 11 years old, he was writing his own raps. And like I said, he wanted to be like Criss Cross. He wanted to get a record deal. And then around the age of 10 or 11, around that same time, Rob Kenner goes into a story about how Nipsey had a situation happen to him. And what the situation was it was back to school time. And he wanted to, have some fly clothes because he was probably more into fashion than any child would be at that particular age. And his mom gave him like $50. And, in his mind, that wasn't going to be enough for him to get clothes for back to school. I mean, imagine your mom giving you $50 for clothes, and that's supposed to, provide your whole wardrobe at 10 or 11 years old. So he decided to take the money, but he knew that wasn't going to be enough. He was going to have to get his own money. And what he started doing was his first job was shining shoes. He knew that the money that his mother gave him wasn't going to be enough. But he did odd jobs around the neighborhood. He shined shoes, and he had over $300 by the time it was time to go shopping for school clothes. And I thought that was very, very impressive for a young man. One, to have the wherewithal to understand that, hey, my mom can't afford this and we can't afford this. So instead of complaining, instead of going out and robbing somebody and taking it, he hustled to get it. And that started his early drive as far as like having an entrepreneur mindset of wanting to have something and then going out and getting it himself. In the book, it talks about obviously his early influences, his father, DeWitt Ashkadom, a man of Eritrean descent. His mother was African-American, Black woman. But his parents were his influences. Obviously, his big brother, Black Sam. And I think Sam is 3 years older than Nipsey. And so, they were his early influences as far as like what he wanted to be like, or the people that he lived for. Another influence that I did not know about was a guy by the name of Dexter Brown. And Dexter Brown lived in the neighborhood, and he had like this room in the back of his house, or separate from the house. And in that place, in that area, what he did was he set up music equipment. And Nipsey was someone who had studied and even at a young age gone to a community center to learn more about music after school and things of that nature. And so Dexter Brown basically had this area that eventually would become a studio, and they called it Butter Vision. And so what he did was he befriended Nip, and he realized that this was more than a young man trying to waste a lot of time. He saw a level of talent in Nipsey Hussle, or young Aramis, if you will, and allowed him and his friends to come over and record music. And it was at that juncture was when he actually made what would be the beginnings of his first mixtape, Slauson Boy Volume 1. And so, it was very key that he had a figure in his life, a male figure who didn't want anything, but he knew if Nipsey and his friends were coming over, it's less likely that they would be in the street and getting into trouble. More on that in just a second. But, Dexter Brown was someone who was, I'd like to think of as like a guardian angel for Nipsey. I think there are people like Dexter Brown that are placed in people's lives that don't get the headlines, that are very instrumental in helping them become who they were. And I think Dexter Brown was someone who definitely did just that. And again, he wasn't someone who wanted anything. It wasn't like he signed Nipsey to an early contract or, tried to take every dime from him or anything like that. I mentioned Trouble. Well, Trouble wasn't that far away. As many of you know, Nipsey Hussle grew up in the neighborhood of Crenshaw, which is the Rolling 60s Crips neighborhood. And what was interesting was Nipsey came from a family that didn't have any gangbangers, and his older brother wasn't a gangbanger, and neither was his father. And so what was interesting that I found out was that how it went about to where Nipsey got to the point where he wanted to join the Rolling 60s Crips. And, you know, it is, I think it's a very interesting time, because I think at this particular time, Nipsey might have been around 13, 14 years old. He had dropped out of school and he decided to hustle and gangbang. Now his hustle, once he got into the gang, his hustle became obviously getting into drugs, but he was also hustling any and everything that he could, because he really saw his focus as he wanted to be, an entrepreneur. He wanted to be a rapper. And, you know, being in the gang did something different for him. He talked about in the book as far as like how he got put on. And this wasn't a firsthand account from Nipsey, but what was told to Rob Kenner in the book. But even in understanding that, you have to understand the type of person that Nipsey Hussle was at the time. And it wasn't something that I think he had to do. But when you hear his story, the light kind of goes off and like, okay, I get it. I understand why he made the choice to get in the gang. And as many of you know, the Rolling 60 Crips are, you know, one of the biggest gang, if not the biggest gang in LA. Or at least at that particular time. And so the thing that I found interesting about how Nipsey is portrayed in this book, as it relates to the Rolling 60s, and it also kind of goes through with his music, is that he never talks about anything that he did or didn't do, which is smart. But he also doesn't come off as being preachy, as far as joining a gang. He never made gangbanging seem like something you should do or make it feel like it was something that he was ashamed of, or nor was it glorified. He just kind of talked about it directly. And that's something that I think, I've talked about this, not on this particular podcast, but on my podcast, the 12 Kyle podcast. I have my homeboy, Uncle Dolomite, who's a Nutty Block Crip. He does the same thing. Like when Dolomite speaks of anything that involved his time with Nutty Block, he never makes it sound as if like it was something that you should do. He never makes it sound as if like it's something he's ashamed of, but he never says anything that's gonna, you know, possibly get him in trouble as to what he did or didn't do. But again, having lived in a way, you really don't grasp it unless you have lived in that type of environment. And the homie Baylor, BTG for President, has talked about that as well. And I thought that was very key, especially coming from someone who was in the Rolling 60s, where you really had the opportunity, especially once you picked up a microphone, to really glorify your gang and maybe shoot down a couple of gangs on the microphone. And he never made gang banging sound like it was something you should do. And again, he never made it sound like he was ashamed of it either. He was a proud Rolling 60 member. But that being said, he also, in his raps, as he would further along his career, talked about the consequences of being in the life or being in the streets. And I think that's a good point that I think, you know, most Nipsey's fans realize, but then, you know, people who kind of came onto the Nipsey scene later on in life, like me, I can definitely appreciate it. One of the things that I think stands out about this book, of the many things that stand out about this book, is that Rob Kenner does not portray Nipsey Hussle to be perfect. None of us are. He paints him as someone who is constantly learning, and also someone who is constantly pushing himself and those around him to be better. And I think those lessons are what stands out about Nipsey and the book in and of itself. Nipsey, before the music and before the fame, was an interesting, very interesting person. So somewhere around December of 2005, he releases the aforementioned Slauson Boy mixtape volume 1. Now that mixtape, when it came out, it helped him break out locally and build a regional fan base on the West Coast. It led to him signing to Cinematic Music as well as Epic Records. Then subsequently, as many of you know, or maybe you don't know, or familiar with his success story, there was a mixtape run. And Nipsey Hussle's mixtapes were, simply put, legendary. And they still resonate to this day. Now, personally, one of my favorites is Bullets Ain't Got No Name Volume 2. I still play that one to this day. I still play a lot of Nipsey's music, obviously, but I play that one probably more than his other mixtapes. Bullets Ain't Got No Names volumes came out. I think those started somewhere around 2008. But the success of those mixtapes obviously gave him more success, financial success, as well as pushing him out to a bigger audience. Now, I mentioned that he had signed with Epic Records. Epic Records was going through some financial hardships, and they had leadership changes, and his contract was not renewed. And so it left him in a really, really tough state. I think at that point, he wasn't really sure what he wanted to do, because he knew that he wanted to continue as a rapper, but also he was moving a little further away from the streets. But, you know, you need money, you know, to keep this thing going. And so he was kind of dibbling and dabbling back in the streets. And so at that point, he created his own record label, All Money In, because what happened was the collapse at Epic caused him to shop around. And when you're shopping for a deal, your own record deal, it's imperative that you, one, make an impression upon the labels, but also, you know, make sure that you get the best deal that you can get. What I found interesting was there were a lot of music labels who were interested in signing Nipsey Hussle. The key thing about that was Nipsey was not interested in just taking any deal. The book dives into some of the meetings that he had and some of the executives that he met with. Again, he didn't want to just take any deal. He knew his worth, and he came into those meetings with demands of what he wanted, and not just signing a deal, but establishing partnerships. Some labels, quite honestly, didn't want to relent, and they stood firm on, hey, this is what we're going to give you. Others kind of shied away because of his ties to the street. Again, he's a rolling 60 Crip, and he makes no bones about it. But he eventually found All Money In Records, and on December 21st, 2010, he would release the first effort off that label, which was called The Marathon. And so then you move into the Marathon mixtapes, the Marathon continues. And then it talks in the book about his push forward in 2013 to Crenshaw. Crenshaw was, in my opinion, the game changer. So Crenshaw was a mixtape that he was offering up, but instead of just putting the mixtape out there on the street, what he wanted to do was change up the game. He offered the mixtape to his fans digitally for free, but then he also printed up 1,000 hard copies. The catch, he was going to sell them for $100. And he talked about it.
Where did you get the idea of charging $100 per CD?
You needed a new chain?
Nah, not just that, man. You know what I'm saying? Nah, you know, I got a few mentors that just put me on books and literature and all that. Big Bob Francis, one of them. And so, you know, he told me about this book called Contagious.
Contagious, uh-huh.
Yeah, so I got to the second chapter of that, and it was just talking about how this restaurant owner in Philly started selling Philly cheesesteaks for $100 out of his restaurant. And it just was like, it set off all type of conversation. Everybody was talking about it. Then all type of influential people came through him and just wanted to check out why it was $100. Like Oprah came through and bought one. David Letterman bought one. He got all type of exposure and publicity. Mm-hmm. And then it became like a staple. And everybody started coming through supporting buying a $100 cheesesteak. Mm-hmm. So I put the book down and I was like, yeah, we about to do that with the album. Nobody did that with music, you know.
That only works if it's worth $100 though.
Yeah, the music gotta
live up to the price eventually when they get it, you know. And I think that I was confident in the music. It's not the album, you know. It was stuff that didn't make Victory Lap, which is my album. But I felt like we recorded all of that with the album in mind. So it wasn't like recorded as a mixtape, you know what I'm saying?
And so when they had the idea, the concept to have $100 mixtape, I remember hearing about it and I didn't even know who he was. I'm like, who in the hell is going to buy $100 mixtape? And again, I wasn't a fan at the time, but there were people who lined up to buy it. And, you know, Jay-Z actually bought copies. And it is said that he sold out Crenshaw within 24 hours, which is crazy. Again, this is 2013. But Jay-Z personally bought 100 copies. And so he made his money there. And, you know, I think the music matched the demand. There was a huge demand for it. But when you price something that high, you know, there's going to be a segment of the population that's going to say, I'm not touching that. There's going to be another segment of the population that says, I got to hear this because I got to see if it's worth $100. And people were proud to pay. And shout out to the Proud to Pay campaign, which was a campaign that he pushed and he talked about in the book as far as where people, he developed a very strong fan base of people who were going to support whatever he did. Because by this time, his name, his brand recognition, everything is out there. People know who he is. He's got singles, he's got hit songs, and he's doing it on the street. And one of the things I found interesting was, one of the first songs that he ever recorded was a song called Fuck the Middleman. And in essence, that's what he did. Fuck the middleman. He moved the middleman out. If you can offer a product to people and you can give it directly to the consumer and you don't have to deal with the middleman, well, you stand to gain almost all of the profits, because now you're not having to have, other people who don't necessarily share your vision into, having a hand in the pot, if you will. But, I thought that was brilliant, and hearing about it. And again, I was around at this time, but I wasn't a fan. I was vaguely aware of who he was, but what Nipsey was doing at that particular time was, he was building a name. And as he was building a name, he was building a brand. And as he was building a brand, he was also building a small fortune, and he was building independently. Now, in this time frame, you know, he had gotten into trouble a couple of times, been in and out of jail. Not minor things, not major things either, but like just the back and forth between street stuff, if you will. But as he built independently, he was also investing and buying businesses in his South Central LA neighborhood. And not only that, one of the most important things that happened to Nipsey during this time is, as he's building a name and building money for himself, he's also building and cultivating relationships. In the book, it doesn't sound like he's someone who is in any way, shape, or form interested in burning any relationships. He saw the value in the working relationships that he had with industry people. And he almost always knew the value that he had with people in the streets, but that was a different type of thing and a different type of vibe and a different type of energy. Two people in particular in the industry that I think the book talks about that he got close to were Miami rapper Rick Ross and fellow LA rapper YG. As far as Rick Ross, they started doing songs together very early in Nip's career. And, Nip has shouted him out and talked about how he and Rick Ross talked about building wealth and generational wealth. And it was something that went from their conversations to the recording booth to messages that they would spread and Nipsey would spread throughout, his interviews and things of that nature. One of the things that I loved reading was that Nipsey was a fan of interviews. And I think that's key and it makes sense now, because I'll be honest, when Nipsey, if you see a Nipsey Hussle interview on YouTube, you're probably going to sit and watch it, because The guy is very, very intentional, very charismatic, and very direct. And he comes off as if not as a know-it-all, but someone who is very intelligent. And he almost, in a really strange way, he seems like, at least for me, somebody that you knew, even if you didn't know him. I never knew him personally, never met him or anything like that. YG in particular, they got to be very close very quickly. Again, doing songs together. Both he and YG and he and Rick Ross, in a lot of ways became like brothers on the microphone, both in the booth and away from the booth. And what was interesting was, just obviously when you're talking about YG, someone who is a Piru blood, Treetop, I think is where he's from. And, while Nip's gang, the Rolling 60s and Treetop Pirus, they aren't at any conflict. I think there was some type of association that YG had with another set, and I think it was the Inglewood Family Gangsta Bloods. And there was some discussion or some discourse about YG coming into the 60s neighborhood. The book touches on it. I won't go into details about it. You can read it. I don't really know that there was a lot to unpack there. It could be, but I would leave that for, someone who was there to talk about. I don't make it a habit of speaking of things that I don't know anything about. The book kind of leaves a lot up to interpretation. And of course, the big collaboration that, Nipsey did with, YG was FDT. Those initials stand for fuck Donald Trump. And it was a smash. So shout out to YG. But the book mainly focuses on, in a lot of ways, Nipsey's independence. And he was really focused on being more independent than seeking any type of success with a major record label. Maybe it was his time in the streets. Maybe it was his experiences when he was trying to shop a deal. All of those things led to him really being focused on being an independent artist. And when you read the book or hear the audio book, you'll get the names of a lot of industry people who passed on him. And I mean, Nipsey's mentioned their names, some of their names in songs. But I can only imagine that there were a lot of industry executives and labels that kicked themselves once they got to hear, the final product or whatever with being Victory Lap, and wishing that they had signed him. And I think his push to be independent, I think, really stood out in the book. And one of the things that I think Nipsey did was he also helped change how artists think about ownership. And then that speaks to Nipsey Hussle, the businessman. Hussle did things the Hussle way. I mentioned, running with cops. He and Black Sam had a T-shirt shop called Slauson Tees right there on the corner of Slauson and Crenshaw. And, the cops raided the place a couple of times. They got into it with the cops and, but it was that level of entrepreneurship because at first they were selling T-shirts in front of a storefront and, they got their stuff confiscated and the cops basically said, well, look, you want to sell out here, you got to get, you got to get a store and pay rent like everybody else. And they eventually bought the building that would become Slauson Tees. But Nipsey had invested in real estate. He created this thing called Vector 90, which is a co-working space, a business incubator for STEM and research in the Crenshaw district, and which was much needed. And it's still, going to this day. He talked a lot about STEM education, investing, ownership. And not only was he just talking about it, he lived it. He was constantly buying different buildings, buying different blocks, right there in that South Central neighborhood. And I think that's very important because it's one thing to have financial success as far as an MC or a businessman or businesswoman. It's another thing for the people in your community to see that, and they saw that. And, you know, while I'm sure he didn't live, and the book never talked about where he lived, but while he didn't live, you know, in that neighborhood anymore, his money was still being funneled back into the Black community, into his community. And there's a lesson to be learned from that. And I think that was very powerful. I mentioned earlier the Marathon clothing store, which is no longer in the neighborhood where it was before, because it was initially designed to be a smart store where you could bridge the gap between technology and giving customers access to exclusive music just by making purchases. But, you know, the Marathon clothing store is now on Melrose, which is where, if you're watching on YouTube and Spotify, this is where I got this shirt from. Really dope shirt. Shout out to the people and the staff at the Marathon clothing store. Listen, when I came in there a couple of years ago when I was out in LA, they treated me like royalty, and they didn't know who I was. I mean, the customer service was just over the top. And I guess, you know, I probably looked like I didn't, you know, I mean, I had on an SC State hoodie. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure they didn't know what SC State was. But, you know, they went above and beyond. And then once I started talking, they could realize this dude ain't from here. So, but they were more than friendly, and copped a couple of things out of there. And I plan to go back next time I'm out in LA. That's going to be one of my first stops. But my first stop is going to be Marathon Burger, which I got a chance to check out 2 years ago. The one on Melrose, and I think there's 2 or 3 other locations. Phenomenal burger. The homie Bale and I went, and it's arguably one of the best burgers I've ever had in my life. No lie. But just seeing those things and seeing the economic impact that Nipsey had, I think is very key, and it's very telling to, you know, the success that he had. One thing that I really took away from the book was Nipsey wasn't trying to become rich by himself. He wanted everybody around him to win. And I think that comes from that community mentality of the Rolling 60s to some degree. And then just who he was as a person. He was really about family. He spoke very openly about his love and respect for his big brother, Black Sam, who has genuinely carried everything on. But his love for his parents, the book talked about how, I think when he was 17 or 18, his dad took Nipsey and Black Sam back to Eritrea, their motherland, where they are descended from. And they were out there for, I think it was 2 weeks, and 2 or 3, no, it may have been a month. I can't remember the time, but that trip changed his life. Now I want to talk about the marathon, because there's a marathon mentality, I think, that not only surrounded Nip, but it's something that he preached. When you think about marathon, what does it actually mean?
You know, if you really think about the metaphor of the marathon, when you look at it as like life, yeah, it's about endurance. It's about preparing. It's about mentally breaking through your barriers that tell you I can't keep going. Where you know you're more capable you more capable than you think you are, and then you conscious of.
To me, the marathon means a couple of things. It means patience, because if you're running a marathon, it is obviously a 26-mile race, but you got to have patience to run a marathon. And life truly is a marathon. You got to have consistency. That's one of the key things about running, is that you got to be consistent. You got to keep doing the same things the same way to get the results that you want. Obviously, you have to be disciplined. It goes without saying that discipline is needed to run a marathon. You know, Nipsey talked about the marathon continuing as far as ownership was concerned. He believed in making sure that we owned and invested in our own, which is something that a lot of people talk about, but very few do. And then the marathon, I think, also speaks to delayed gratification. Like, you got to run these laps. You got to keep running. the thing about running a marathon, literally and figuratively, is that it doesn't happen quickly. The marathon and being able to run a marathon is based on your endurance. So you're not going to win a medal for running a marathon in a minute because it doesn't happen like that. It is a grind that you take and you push yourself through over a 26-mile journey. And in life, we'll run several marathons. And the thing is that you have to keep going. And I think the marathon concept really became bigger than any other thing that you probably could take from Nipsey. He spoke very openly about running a marathon and not literally running a marathon, but, running a marathon as far as, having the discipline to push yourself, having the discipline to, not get down on yourself, even when you're not sure about something. And it's something that with Nipsey's fans still resonate to this day. The last thing I want to touch on in the book, the book does not cover, the book covers obviously his death. Nipsey, as many of you know, was tragically murdered March 31st, 2019. As I've said before, there is a video, or there may still be a video of the actual security cameras of a video of, him actually being shot. That was never going to be something that I watched. I remember where I was when I got the news, and I remember how it kind of spread through social media. Here's what I will say. I don't speak on street shit because I ain't a street dude, right? I don't get into conspiracy theories or anything like that. I think more than anything else, that part of the book was very hard for me to read. And because the book does detail in great length the last hour or so of Nipsey Hussle's life. And a lot of it's based on the testimony of the young lady who was with the alleged shooter. Well, I guess I couldn't call him the convicted shooter, Eric Holder, who was also a member of the Rolling 60s Crips. Like I said, I don't speak on street shit. It was there street shit involved? I don't know. I wasn't there. What I can tell you, what I took from the book was just, that's a really tough part for me to read and listen to, because you know that he died, but you don't want anybody to die like that. Especially someone who meant so much to so many people and whose music touched the lives of millions. And, the thing that I always say about Nipsey Hussle is, simply put, he should be here. Nothing more, nothing less. He should be here. The reasons why he isn't here and the events surrounding his death, I don't talk about. Because again, I don't know. The book ends with, talking about his death and then the subsequent testimony, but it does not get into the sentencing of Eric Holder. Eric Holder was, as many of you know, sentenced to 60 years in prison. As far as I know, by all accounts, he's in protective custody. He has been, from reports that we've heard over the years, physically assaulted. And, there's nothing I can say about that, because if you take down somebody as important as Nipsey Hussle was, there's going to be a fallout from it. I'm not going to get into the theories as to whether or not Holder did it alone or he was put up to it by anybody. That's not me. What I will say is it's very tragic that he's no longer with us. And, I think he should be here, and I miss him. I'm not going to lie. Lastly, Nipsey Hussle's legacy. His legacy lives on. I think one of the things that is very impressive about Nipsey Hussle is his dream didn't die when he physically left this earth. we are still seeing the manifestations of his dream. As many of you know, Nipsey has 2 children, a daughter and a son, and God bless both of them. His daughter Amani, his son Cross, and his longtime girlfriend / fiance / wife, actress Lauren London, and his family. God bless all of them. I know that times like this, you know, when his birthday comes around, I would assume that every day is tough. I'm not even going to sit here and pretend like I know what it is, but I'm one of the people that I don't acknowledge March 31st, 2019. I know that it happened. I know that that day exists. I know where I was that day, but I don't celebrate that. I celebrate his birth. And again, I told you, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, he shares a birthday with my dad, who on August 15th will be 80 years old. And, you know, I wish that Nipsey Hussle had lived to see 80. But I think his legacy is stamped. And like I said, one of the great things is, you know, his legacy continues just like the marathon. You know, he was not only an inspiration to his fans, but inspiration to independent artists throughout the world. Speaking on Black entrepreneurship, community investment, financial literacy, generational wealth, ownership of everything. He was truly a man before his time. And so, you know, my final thoughts is I think this is a great book. If you don't want to physically read the book, it's a great audiobook. It's available everywhere. Rob Kenner, salute to you. Great job well done. It's not something that I think that you put down once you pick it up. But again, in many ways, I felt like this would be a great opportunity to pay tribute to Nipsey by reviewing this book, as opposed to putting out a tweet or putting out a picture or asking people what their favorite Nipsey Hussle song is, or if they thought Victory Lap was a classic. I've already done an episode on Victory Lap. If you did not catch it, just go through the archives. I did do an album breakdown of Victory Lap, an album that I still play to this day. I play a lot of his music, but Victory Lap, Crenshaw, and probably Bullets Ain't Got No Name Volume 2 are probably the ones that never have fallen out of rotation. And to Nipsey's fans, thank you for watching. I'm with you. I'm a fan as well. And I'll be first to admit I wasn't a fan early on. I kind of caught on late, but it's been a pleasure for me to go back and hear some of this music and see some of these interviews that I missed when I was out running around. But Ermias Ashkadom was a very impressive human being. And I think he's left a legacy that we can all admire. And that's not just Nipsey's fans, entrepreneurs, hip hop fans, business minded people, people who are interested in community development. I think all of you will be a little bit better off by either listening to this audiobook or purchasing this book, from Rob Kenner. And the last thing I'll add is, Nipsey Hussle obviously used to say, the marathon continues. After reading this book, I think I better understand that phrase more than ever. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about building something that could outlive you. And in a lot of ways, that's exactly what Nipsey Hussle did. He built a brand. He built a legacy. He built music that will stand the test of time. And none of us could ask for anything more than that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the Rap Soul Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We drop new episodes every Thursday. Make sure that you subscribe. Go to the rapsoulpodcast.riverside.com. Go there and subscribe to the newsletter. That way you'll get updates on any and everything that we drop as it concerns the podcast. And I promise you, we're not going to spam you. We won't spam your email. But ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the Rap Soul Podcast. I am your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. This concludes the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Rap Soul podcast. You can find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Follow the podcast on social media. And feel free to continue this discussion on our Reddit page. More importantly, share this podcast with a friend or family member who loves music as much as you do. Until next time, 5,000.